The night sky over the Middle East is now scarred by the fiery trails of missiles, streaking across the darkness and illuminating the horizon with sudden, violent light. The orange glow of explosions pulses through city skylines, each blast echoing across neighborhoods that, just days ago, were filled with the ordinary sounds of life. In cities across Iran and Israel, air raid sirens wail relentlessly, sending families scrambling for shelter, children clutching parents, neighbors guiding each other through chaos. Buildings collapse into smoldering ruins, their twisted frames and shattered windows a stark reminder of the suddenness with which peace can vanish. The air is thick with dust and fear, uniting ordinary people on both sides in a shared terror that knows no borders or politics, only survival. This is not a distant conflict unfolding on television screens, it's the terrifying reality of June 2025, a direct confrontation that the world has dreaded for decades, now erupting in real time. The headlines may speak of military targets and strategic objectives, but behind every statistic are stories of human loss, families grieving, lives shattered in an instant, futures rewritten by violence. The conflict, once waged in the shadows through covert operations and proxy battles, has now burst violently into the open, marking a perilous new chapter for the entire region. The world watches with bated breath, aware that the shockwaves from this war could destabilize the global order, threaten fragile alliances, and unleash weapons long feared but never used. To understand how we reach this precipice, we must look back at the tangled history that transformed these nations from unlikely partners to bitter adversaries, and trace the path that led to this moment of crisis. Decades ago, Israel and Iran were not enemies but strategic partners in a complex Middle East. Under the Shah, Iran recognized Israel, sharing intelligence and resources against common threats. This alliance shattered with the 1979 Iranian Revolution, as the new regime branded Israel an illegitimate enemy. Iran's revolutionary ideology called for Israel's destruction, severing all ties and fueling decades of animosity. For Israel, losing a powerful ally to a hostile theocracy was a profound shock. The rivalry hardened into a Cold War, driven by mutual suspicion and existential fear. This transformation from cooperation to confrontation is the essential backdrop to today's crisis. The missiles flying now are the physical manifestation of a political and ideological divorce that began over 40 years ago. For decades, Israel and Iran fought not directly but through proxies and covert operations across the region. Iran built a network of allied militias, Hezbollah in Lebanon, armed groups in Syria, Gaza, Iraq, and Yemen, to encircle Israel and challenge its influence. Israel responded with a campaign of airstrikes, sabotage, and assassinations, targeting Iranian assets and nuclear ambitions. This shadow war created a fragile equilibrium, with both sides avoiding direct confrontation. Each covert strike and rocket barrage raised the stakes, deepening animosity and risking miscalculation. Proxy battlegrounds became flashpoints where a single mistake could ignite a wider conflict. The direct attacks of June 2025 marked the catastrophic failure of this balance. The shadow war has erupted into open, devastating conflict. On June 13, 2025, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a massive direct assault on Iran's military and nuclear infrastructure. The world watched in shock as, in the early hours before dawn, waves of Israeli fighter jets roared across the skies, targeting some of the most heavily guarded sites in Iran. The operation was meticulously planned, involving months of intelligence gathering, covert surveillance, and coordination across multiple branches of the Israeli military. Israeli officials called it a preemptive strike to neutralize an imminent threat from Iran's nuclear program. At a hastily arranged press conference, government spokespeople emphasized that Israel had exhausted all diplomatic avenues and was left with no choice but to act decisively. Over 100 targets were hit, including uranium enrichment facilities at Natanz and Isfahan, and key IRGC command centers. The strikes were precise, designed to inflict maximum damage on Iran's nuclear capabilities while minimizing civilian casualties. The strikes crippled parts of Iran's nuclear program and killed senior military leaders, aiming to throw Iran's security apparatus into chaos. Emergency teams scrambled to respond, but the scale of destruction was overwhelming, leaving Iran's leadership reeling. Israel's rationale: years of warnings ignored, diplomatic efforts failed, and intelligence suggesting Iran was on the verge of a nuclear breakout. Israeli leaders pointed to repeated appeals at the United Nations and failed negotiations as evidence that the world had not taken the threat seriously enough. The operation was a monumental gamble, intended to reset the strategic balance. Military analysts debated whether Israel's bold move would deter Iran or provoke a wider regional war, as tensions soared across the Middle East. The human cost was severe: dozens killed, hundreds wounded, and critical infrastructure destroyed. Hospitals in Iran were overwhelmed, and families mourned the loss of loved ones as the true scale of the devastation became clear. For Israel, it was a last resort move to eliminate what it saw as an existential threat. The nation braced for retaliation, with military units on high alert and citizens anxiously awaiting the next development. For the region, it was the spark that ignited a new and dangerous phase of conflict. The world now faced the prospect of a rapidly escalating crisis, with unpredictable consequences for the Middle East and beyond. Iran's response was swift and massive. Over 150 ballistic missiles and 100 drones launched at Israel within hours. Major population centers, not just military bases, were targeted, signaling Iran's willingness to inflict mass civilian casualties. Israel's air defenses intercepted most projectiles, but the sheer volume overwhelmed some areas. The attack showcased Iran's new missile technology and marked the first time Israeli cities faced such direct heavy fire from a sovereign state in decades. Despite high interception rates, Iranian missiles caused significant damage and loss of life. Dozens killed, hundreds wounded. Iran framed the retaliation as legitimate self-defense, warning of even greater force if attacked again. The missile salvo fundamentally altered the conflict, ending the era of shadow war. Both nations now faced the terrifying reality of direct state-on-state warfare. The world watched as the region teetered on the edge of catastrophe. The escalating conflict has devastated ordinary citizens in both Israel and Iran. In Israel, daily life halted, airspace closed, schools shut, and millions forced into bomb shelters. Hospitals moved patients underground and families were separated as reservists were called up. The psychological toll is immense, with anxiety and uncertainty gripping the nation. In Iran, Israeli strikes on energy infrastructure sparked massive fires, causing fuel shortages and panic in major cities. The regime tightened its grip, cracking down on dissent as fear and repression grew. For ordinary Iranians, the war adds to economic hardship and political oppression. In both countries, millions suffer the consequences of a war they did not choose. In the aftermath, leaders on both sides unleashed fierce rhetoric, fueling the cycle of escalation. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu vowed unprecedented retaliation, framing the conflict as a fight for survival. Defense officials echoed threats, projecting strength to both the public and Iran. Iran's supreme leader promised severe punishment, while the IRGC warned of more devastation. Public threats were paired with private signals to the UN, hinting at a desire to avoid wider war, if Israel held back. Both sides are trapped in an escalatory spiral, compelled to show resolve even as they fear the risks. The language of annihilation leaves little room for de-escalation, pushing the region closer to disaster. The Israel-Iran conflict sent shockwaves worldwide, triggering urgent diplomatic efforts and economic turmoil. The U.S. assisted Israel's missile defense but distanced itself from the initial strikes, wary of being drawn into war. The UN and global powers called for restraint, while Russia and China warned of catastrophic consequences. Oil prices surged by over 13%, reflecting fears of disruption in a region critical to global energy supplies. Stock markets tumbled as investors fled to safety and inflation fears grew. Arab Gulf states called for calm, fearing the conflict could spill across their borders. Fragile diplomatic processes, including U.S.-Iran nuclear talks, collapsed. With diplomacy stalled, military force became the region's primary language, pushing the world closer to a wider war. As the dust settles, the Middle East stands at a crossroads, facing a choice between fragile de-escalation and the looming threat of catastrophic regional war. The world watches anxiously, aware that the decisions made in the coming days could shape the fate of millions and alter the course of history in this volatile region. Israel claims its strike was a last resort, a desperate measure to prevent what it sees as the existential threat of a nuclear-armed Iran. Iranian leaders, meanwhile, framed their retaliation as a necessary defense of sovereignty and national pride, insisting that their actions are a response to aggression and a warning against future attacks. Both sides see their actions as justified, driven by deep-seated existential fears, historical grievances, and a powerful sense of national honor. Ordinary citizens, caught in the middle, grapple with uncertainty and anxiety about what tomorrow may bring. The risk of further escalation is clear. A cycle of strikes and counterstrikes could ignite a wider war, drawing in neighboring countries and global powers, and causing immense destruction across borders. The consequences would be devastating not just for the region but for the world at large. Economic fallout would be global, with oil prices soaring, energy markets destabilized, and the specter of recession looming over economies already under strain. Everyday people everywhere would feel the impact, from rising fuel costs to market volatility. The specter of nuclear proliferation haunts the region, threatening to trigger a dangerous arms race that could spiral out of control. The possibility of weapons of mass destruction falling into the wrong hands is a nightmare scenario for the entire world. In this moment, clear-eyed analysis and renewed diplomacy are more critical than ever. Only through dialogue, negotiation, and a willingness to compromise can the cycle of violence be broken and a path to stability forged. The international community must act decisively, pulling both nations back from the brink and creating off-ramps from escalation. The responsibility to prevent further bloodshed and chaos rests not just with leaders, but with all who value peace. Even in darkness, the pursuit of peace remains the only true path to security. It is a hope that endures, lighting the way forward for generations to come.